Welcome to Lesson 6. In this video, we'll be going through two features that will make it easier for you to build apps with Bubble. And those two features are custom states and reusable elements. So let's jump right in to learn more about how they work. But you may be wondering, what exactly are custom states? So custom states can be considered as variables, and variables are basically containers that store information. But custom states are used to store temporary information without using the database. And this is normally referred to as client-side storage or front-end storage. And this can basically save you time and speed up your application because it does not have to wait to retrieve information from the database. Another important point is that refreshing the page will reset the value of a custom state. And that's because it's not stored directly in the database. So in order to demonstrate how custom states work, we'll be basically building a very simple representation of a dashboard of an online store. So normally within a dashboard, a user would click on a menu tab and what the user will see will change based on what was clicked. So for example, if we click on this menu tab, the user will basically see the orders within the online store. And when you click on this menu tab, they'll see some stats regarding the online store. And when we click on this one, they'll basically see a list of products. And normally this is how dashboards work. When a person clicks on a menu tab, what they see will change without having to redirect them to a new page. And this feature basically uses custom states. So let's see how to recreate this feature using Bubble. So before using custom states, let's basically walk through what we have on the screen. So here we basically have three groups that contain icons within them. And then here we have a text element, which basically has a width of 300 pixels and a height of 250 pixels. So let's see how custom states are created. So in order to create a custom state, you can either use any element or basically use the page. So let's use the page to create a custom state. So we can double click on the page and then we can click on this icon here, which will open the element inspector. And then here we see an option to create a custom state. So when we click that, we can create our state name and state type. So for the state name, we can name it view because it will change the view of the dashboard depending on what the user clicks. And then for state type, let's use a simple type. For now, we can use text and then click create. So you'll realize that we have an option to create a default value. So we can create a default value of products. So what this means is that every time this page is opened, this custom state will have this value, which is products. In other words, we're saying that when the user opens the page, we want to set the custom state or our view to products, so that this menu tab is selected by default when a user opens a page. So now that we created a custom states, we need to have elements that control our custom states. So let's say when this menu tab is clicked, or basically group A is clicked, we can start or edit our workflow, and then we can go to element actions, and then click set state. Another easy way to find actions is basically to type them here. So we can type in state, and click set state of an element. And then here we can select the element that's linked to our custom state. And in this case, it's basically our page, which is called custom state example. But we can rename our page to something more short and relevant. So since we're building an online store, we can say store. And then here we can go to our page name and select our custom state, which is view. So when group A is clicked, we want the state to change to products. So since our custom state uses a state type of text, we need to enter a text. So let's type in products. And to make our workflows more readable, instead of saying when group A is clicked, we can say when group product is clicked. And that way it will make more sense within our workflow tab. And then we can change this one to orders. And then we can change this one to stats. So we have three groups named products, orders, and stats. So in our workflow tab, it will read when group product is clicked, change the state to products. So that makes more sense. So that's basically a tip that you can use in order to make your workflows make a little bit more sense during development. And then we can do the same thing for orders. So we can click on the group and then go to start or edit workflow. A quick tip is that instead of repeating our steps, we can basically copy and paste the actions that we have previously made. So we can go to products, then basically copy this action by right clicking on it and then select copy. Then go back to orders and then right click and select paste. And since this is the orders tab, we can change this to orders. We can do the same thing for the last tab for stats and then click paste. And then we can write down stats. So basically we're saying that when these groups are clicked, then the state of our page should change to orders, products, as well as stats. So when the state changes, we want something to change as well on the screen. So normally what would happen is when you click on a certain menu tab, then the dashboard will show the particular information that you clicked for. So to make a simple representation of that, we can go to our text element. And then here we can insert dynamic data. And then we want this text element to basically show the value of the state. So we can go to the page name, which is store, and then store's view. So we expect that when the state changes, then this text will change since this is dynamic. And we'll see an example of that. Also, we remember that in our example, every time we clicked on a menu tab, the color would change to show on which tab we clicked on. So we can also use custom states to control that. So by default, the color will be this light blue, but we want it to change based on the state. So we can go to the conditional tab. And then here we can select our page name, which is store. So when store's view is products, then we want the background color to change to a slightly darker blue, like so. And we can basically repeat this condition for the rest of the tabs. So we can copy the expression by simply right clicking and then select copy expression. Then we can go to the next tab and then paste expression and then select the property to change, which is the background color, to this blue. Same thing with the last tab. But we remember that the state has different values. So in other words, we want this tab to change only when the view is currently set to stats. Same thing with this tab. I'm going to change it to orders. Yes, so group products will change the background color when the view is set to products. This one will change the background color when the view is set to orders. And then on this tab, when the view is set to stats, the background color will change accordingly. So we just need to ensure that by default, the tab colors should be the light blue. So let's go to the first tab and then copy this value and then paste it here. Right. So that basically completes the feature that we wanted to build. So let's currently preview our page to see if it works. As you can see, when the page is loaded, our state is set to products and the background color of this tab changed to this darker blue. And when we click on orders, same thing happens. And when we go to the last tab, the same thing happens. So we can see that using custom states, we can basically control what the user sees. And this was a simple representation of how a dashboard would normally work. So hopefully that clarifies how to use custom states. But it's now time to talk about reusable elements. But what exactly are reusable elements? Well, reusable elements are basically elements that can be used in more than one place. But you may be asking yourself, when would you want to do this? Well, this is beneficial when we have to use the same element often. For example, let's say that you want to show a specific type of pop-up in 3 different pages in your app. So instead of building that pop-up 3 times, you can create a reusable element and then paste it on those 3 pages. Another benefit of reusable elements is that they are very easy to edit since changes are applied globally. In other words, when you edit a reusable element, those changes will be applied globally where you have placed that reusable element. But let's now see an example of how to create reusable elements. So just to explain what we'll be building, we basically want to create a list of users, and we want to be able to click on each entry of the list in order to show a pop-up, which will be a reusable element that will show more information about that user. And this is the list of users in our database which will be displayed. And we're going to be using specific data types such as the email address of the user, the gender, the name, the surname, as well as the user type. And when we go to the data types tab, these are basically all the fields that we have created in our previous lesson. So in order to add more example users in your database, you can simply go to the app data tab and go to this data type and then click to add a new entry. And then you can simply add the name, the surname, the email address, the gender, the user type, and so forth. And that's what we have done here. So to start, let's place a repeating group on the screen. So you can find it under containers and you can simply click on it and then drag it on the screen. But please note that for this example, I'll not be using the new responsive engine. But if you want to, you can simply go and upgrade the page to use the new responsive engine. So now I'm basically going to increase the width of this repeating group. And then I'd like to center it horizontally and center it vertically. Now when I double click on the repeating group, the property editor shows up. So we have to now define the type of content that this repeating group will have. So we can go and click user since we want to show a list of contacts or a list of users within our database. And then we have to assign a data source. So for this, we can select on do a search for users. So basically this will make a search for all our users within our database, and that will be our source of data. And then in order to identify the users within each entry, we want to place the username here. So we can add a text element. So I'd actually like to show the name as the first name and the surname. So for that, we can insert dynamic data and click on current cells users name. But this will only show the first name. So in order to show the surname, we can click here and then add some space and then insert dynamic data again and then choose current cells users surname. So this will basically show the first name with the space in between as well as the surname. So we can simply center this vertically. Then we can increase the width. Now we want to have a button that we will click, which will show the pop-up. And that pop-up will be a reusable element, which we'll create in a few moments. So we can click to add the button. Then we can basically write more info. Then we can also center this button vertically like so. So we can now see our list of users. But it may happen that this data may not show when you try to preview your page. And this may be because of the privacy setting. So just for the purpose of this video, I simply made the user data type as publicly visible by simply deleting the privacy rule. So you can either tweak the privacy rule or basically delete it in order to see this data. But of course, for a live application, you will want to make some data private. So I just deleted the privacy rule for the purpose of this video. Now we want that when this button is clicked, it will show a pop-up that shows more information about this user. So one way to create a reusable element is basically to come to this drop down, and you can see this option that says add a new reusable element. But another way is to add the element to your current page and then convert it into a reusable element. So to show an example of that, let's create a pop-up on our page, and then we can right click it, and then you can select this option that says convert into a reusable element. And then you can enter in the element's name. Once the reusable element is created, it will look like this. And this white box here is basically our pop-up. So we can double click on it to show the property editor. And as you can see, it shows that the type of element is a pop-up. And then we can select the type of content that this pop-up will have. So we can click on user. And that's because when we click on a specific user within our list, we want to pass the data from that list into this pop-up. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Afterwards, we want to add some text that will show the user's information. So we can add a text element, and we can center it horizontally and center it vertically. And then here we can write down email and then select insert dynamic data, and then click parent groups users email address. And we're saying parent group because this pop-up here is the main parent element. So the data will be passed from this parent element into this child element. And that's why we're saying parent groups users email. Afterwards, we can click and select enter in order to have some space. And then we can show another piece of detail such as the gender. Then click parent groups users, genders, display. So because gender is linked to an option set, we need to click display in order to show the option that has been selected for this user. And another quick tip is to use rich text. So we can do that by clicking on this link here. And this will show the rich text editor. And we can basically make some text bold, like email and gender. And it will look like so. So for this specific pop-up, I'll basically adjust the size since we're not showing too much data here. It will look like that. And now that we have created our reusable element, which is basically a pop-up, let's go back to our page to see how to show this reusable element. So we're now back to our page, and in order to add that pop-up which we just created, you can scroll down to reusable elements and then click on the specific element we want. In this case, it's our user info pop-up. So we can click and drag, and then it will be shown here. So you'll notice that we can't directly edit the element here. So in order to edit this pop-up, we'll need to go to our pages, and then we can click on user info to go back to that page where we were editing this reusable element. So now that the user info pop-up has basically been added to our page, we can now edit this button to show that pop-up. So we can click it to show the property editor and then click start or edit workflow. So here we can use the action that will show the pop-up. So we can type in show and then select show an element. And then here we can select the user info element, which is a reusable element. And then an important step that we want to do is that we basically want to pass data from the selected user into this pop-up. So in order to do that, you can click here and then click display data in a group or pop-up. And this is actually a recommended next action. So it will be here by default. And then we can select the data to display. So we can click on current cells user. So this will basically transfer data from the selected user in our list to this pop-up. And that's basically what's happening with these two steps. We're basically showing the pop-up, and then we are displaying that data of the selected user within this pop-up. So we can click to preview. So let's now click to see if our pop-up works. So as you can see, after clicking on more info, we are shown this pop-up, which is a reusable element that shows the data that we wanted to display, such as the email and gender. And the same thing will happen for any user that we select, such as Tim Gordon, or Jessica, or Jack. So this is basically how you create a reusable element and use it within a repeating group. And that brings us to the end of lesson 6. But in the next one, we'll learn more about the workflow tab, and we'll see examples of how to create sign-up and login workflows using custom states. So thanks a lot for having a look at this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.